All right, let's get right into it. There's a major standoff happening in Minnesota that's causing a ton of debate. We're going to break down the arguments coming from a pretty viral YouTube video that says it has the righteous perspective on the conflict between the state's leaders and federal law enforcement. Right off the bat, the speakers in this video set some incredibly high stakes. I mean, when someone says there's going to be more bloodshed, they're not just talking politics anymore, are they? They're telling you that without some kind of drastic action, people are going to die. This is the foundation for everything else they're about to argue. So, to really understand their point of view, we're going to walk through 5 key parts of their argument. We'll look at how they see the crisis, the specific people they're accusing, how they defend the federal response, their proposed strategy, and then, the big picture worldview that ties it all together. Okay, first up, the crisis in Minnesota. And right away, the source video makes it clear they don't see this as just some political squabble. For them, it's like there are 2 totally different realities, 2 completely competing narratives unfolding at the exact same time. And this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got Minnesota's leaders saying federal agents are running a campaign of organized brutality, literally kidnapping innocent people. But then, the video we're looking at, they say, no, we're just arresting actual criminals who are part of a radical anarchist insurrection. I mean, you can't get much further apart than that. And here's where they really turn up the heat. They put a specific legal label on this. They argue that when local officials get in the way of federal law enforcement, it's not just politics. They call it textbook insurrection. And they say these officials are playing a deadly game that could land them in some serious trouble. We're talking federal prison. So how do they justify calling elected leaders insurrectionists? Well, this is where the argument takes a turn. They move past policy and start building a case based on personal corruption and deceit, aiming some really serious accusations right at the top. And this number is a huge part of their argument: $9 billion. The source claims there's a massive fraud scandal going on in Minnesota, and they specifically accuse Representative Ilhan Omar of trying to cover it up or deny it's even happening. And to back this up, they present this timeline as, a kind of smoking gun. They allege that in just 1 year, Representative Omar's husband's net worth skyrocketed from about $51,000 to an estimated $30 million. They present this massive jump as pretty clear evidence that something corrupt is going on. It's not just Omar, though. Governor Tim Walz is a major target, too. The source video accuses him of, a few things. Deliberately lying on TV to get people angry at ICE. They bring up some alleged past scandals from his time as a coach. And they also claim he's tied into that massive fraud scandal. Okay, so once they've painted this picture of corrupt leaders, the next logical step in their argument is to explain why, in their view, aggressive federal action isn't just an option, it's necessary. This is their moral and legal justification for what's happening. And they take this argument to a whole different level. It's not just political, it becomes spiritual. They use biblical quotes, like this one from Isaiah, to frame the entire conflict as a moral crusade. It's not about left versus right anymore. It's about good versus evil, light versus dark. And in a battle like that, there's really no room for compromise, is there? Now, this is a really critical piece of their defense. They push back hard on the idea that federal agents are just grabbing random, innocent people off the street. They insist that ICE is targeting very specific individuals, people convicted of really terrible crimes, like violent sexual assault on kids or domestic abuse. They're saying these are actual criminals. But you might be asking, okay, but what about the American citizens who are getting arrested? The source has an answer for that too. They argue these aren't just random people caught in the crossfire. They claim these are folks who actively chose to interfere with law enforcement, by physically blocking them, spitting at them, or even starting fights. So with that worldview in place, where do they go from here? What's the solution? Well, that brings us to their proposed strategy for how the federal government can and should regain control. And it's pretty clear and aggressive. They lay out this very specific 3-step plan. First, you expose. You release all the damaging info you have on leaders like Governor Walz to turn their own supporters against them. Second, you defund. Squeeze the state by cutting off all that federal money for things like roads, schools, you name it. And then only if all else fails, the last resort is to use force. We're talking about invoking the Insurrection Act and actually arresting non-compliant state leaders. And the end goal of this whole strategy is pretty straightforward. It's designed to put the squeeze on from both the inside and the outside. The idea is to create so much pressure, politically and financially, that the people of Minnesota have no choice but to turn against their own governor and mayor. A plan like that doesn't just come out of nowhere. It all comes from a very specific underlying worldview. So let's take a step back and look at the core beliefs about faith, about government, about how we even have political debates that shapes their entire argument. A huge piece of their worldview comes down to this interpretation of a passage from the Bible, Romans 13. Their logic goes like this. God puts governments in place, so their authority comes from Him. That means citizens have a duty to submit to the law of the land. So if you rebel against the law, you're not just committing a political crime. In their view, you're actually rebelling against God. And finally, they have a lot to say about the state of political debate today. On the one hand, here's what they say we should have: objective conversations using facts you can actually verify and being willing to admit when you're wrong. But what they say we actually get is, well, the other side of the chart. Personal attacks, name-calling, emotional arguments, and gaslighting, trying to make people doubt what they see with their own eyes. And it all leads to this point where the other side isn't a fellow American you disagree with. They're just the enemy. And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? This whole thing is bigger than just Minnesota. It's about what happens when two completely opposite realities exist at the same time. It leaves us with a really tough question, and one I'll leave you with. When two sides describe the exact same events in ways that are so fundamentally different, how do any of us figure out what's really true?